I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander, and we'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about God indwelling. In New Thought metaphysical philosophy, we believe in the presence and the power of God in us. And for some people, especially those of traditional Western beliefs, the concept of the idea of God indwelling may be somewhat different or new. I think in one of the other programs, and we've talked in the past about the fact that so many people and so many faith traditions view and teach God as an external outside of us. And I think that's a unique difference between our religious perspective and spiritual perspective and some others, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And more people are coming to terms with that, I think. And it seems that long ago they were like God was vengeful, and justice is mine, saith the Lord, was quite a prominent thing. But more and more we're getting into the fact that yes, God is love, and God is indwelling each of us. And there is an aspect of our beinghood that is a part of God, and it's called the Holy Monad. It has a name, the Holy Monad. And that's a very wonderful thing to know that God is within us. And I think it's helped humankind along in its upward spiral of evolution, just to know that, and to the mass mind and the global brain to accept that has helped our evolutionary journey upward. Don't you think so?
It has, and it's helped our spiritual understanding as well. And I think the concept is not new, really, even to Western thought, but it's new to mainstream, I think, in mainstream Western faith, and certainly today when we see the integration of Eastern and Western philosophy. But I'm thinking even of Brother Lawrence in his book on Practicing the Presence, and different writers throughout the history of the church, as we know it, the Christian church, who have taught and written about the concept of practicing the presence. And it really is an understanding of that reality, that the indwelling presence is something, the presence of God within each one of us is something that we can draw upon. And if we practice the presence of God both inside and around us at all times, then our behavior becomes different and we begin to think differently. And of course, in our tradition, thought has a lot to do with our faith, and that is that our thinking can either align us with the presence and the power of God, or it can separate us from the presence and the power of God. And for so many people of many faith traditions, their mind has separated them from the presence of God. And so what we're about and what we talk about so often is the idea that God indwells all of us. That's the good and the bad, and that's is a difficult concept in some cases for people to understand and grasp fully, but that presence indwells all of us, and that if we live in the awareness of that indwelling presence, then we can be guided and directed in ways that we would never imagine ourselves, because this infinite intelligence, this source of all knowledge and all good and all love, as you said so well, will guide every aspect of our life. It'll guide how we think, how we respond to those around us, how we respond to what's going on in our lives, and how it is that we can be directed to either think differently, live differently, or act differently. And in many cases in our lives, we're faced with the need to do that, don't we? We need to change the way the direction of our lives.
Yes, we do. And if nothing else, no other aspect of being making it positive is it gives us more respect for other people, because we see that God is within each person, and some let the light shine forth more fully than others. But there's that God aspect within every person. And what you said earlier about the God being within every person, regardless of how we might consider them to exercise error of thought totally in their lives, well, God is still there within them waiting. But God gave mankind free will, and so because we have free will, then God and those others on the inner planes of being who influence our lives don't give us specific instructions or direction, or they don't say don't do that. They give us inclination, they give us help from the inner, but we each are free to make our own choices and our own decisions. And the more anyone lives in the light and really honors the God aspect within themselves and God the whole, then the better the life of that person. And so to me, more and more, we're coming into that way of being, And to me, the upward spiral of mankind is truly that, upward. And a lot of people just see the bad things that happen in life, the doom and gloom. But if we look at all the good in life and all the wondrous things that happen in life, and how more and more people are thoughtful of others and caring for others, then we see that, yes, indeed, we have changed for the better.
We have indeed. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of a familiar Bible story that we all know, and that's the story of the prodigal son.
Mhm.
And that story so beautifully illustrates how it is that we are all children of God and we are loved unconditionally. And, so often we think that people need to be punished appropriately
Yeah.
and for what they do. And of course, in our minds, we have that thought. And certainly traditional faiths teach that in some cases. Eastern faiths teach it in karmic teaching. And yet we see the fact in Scripture, and certainly in the parable of the prodigal son, how easily it is that we can overcome the mistakes and the errors of our ways by simply changing our behavior and not doing it anymore. We've somehow decided that repentance and judgment and punishment and all of these things get rolled up into some nice, neat little bundle, and that we all have to suffer for those transgressions or for the bad things that we do, if you will. But if you look at that story, remember, which we all know, the good son stayed home. And the bad son took his inheritance and went out and squandered it. And now, when the son who had squandered the inheritance came home, his father welcomed him unquestioningly and was happy that he was back, because he had come back and he had seen the error of his ways, and he had acknowledged the error of his ways. And Scripture tells us was even willing to be a servant at the table. But his father said that's not necessary. In our lives, we're not usually willing to allow that presence to come out in people who have done things that we think are inappropriate. And of course, we're faced in today's world with a myriad of folks who have done terrible and tragic things. But the fact is that no matter how bad the things that we do, or how bad the things that other people do, by simply changing the way that they behave and changing the way that they think and aligning themselves with the presence and the power of God, they are transformed and changed in that experience. And that the suffering and the punishment that we think is so necessary isn't that necessary at all. But we fail to see that presence and claim it in ourselves, but we especially aren't willing to see it and allow it to come forth in others, especially people who have done some things that we think are inappropriate or bad.
Yes, that reminds me of something that I read, and it's an affirmation that we can all make. The sufferings of the now are not to be compared with the glory which I had with thee before the world was. And we can say that or something similar to it, and it really lifts our spirits, because we're affirming that we were at one with God before birth, and we're affirming our own positive aspect of life. And so I think affirmations are so wonderful. Of course, you do them at the church all the time, and it's very helpful, and everyone feels grateful for that. But we could all, each of us in our own homes, think of affirmations, and just to affirm goodness is a step upward.
Tremendously important. And we do use affirmations a lot at the church, and we use affirmations in our lives, and I really encourage people to do that. And of course, for those who don't know, an affirmation is simply a statement like the one that you just shared, and they're statements of spiritual reality. And the importance is that they're not something that we're trying to gain or get. But what the use of affirmations is to remind our conscious mind so that our subconscious mind can become understanding of a fact that already is true, even though the appearance of that fact may not be manifest in the world. And we have such a tendency to see things as bad, to see things for what they appear on the surface to be, when in fact, there's an entire world of life, which we know as the spiritual dimension of life, that transcends the physical. This physical life is changing all the time. And so we see it to be real, and we see the behavior of others and the behavior of ourselves as being real and constant, which isn't true. We need to be able to see beyond it, and we need to be able to affirm the reality. And as we affirm the reality, even if we don't see it, then our mind begins to grasp that reality, and that reality begins to manifest in our lives. And sometimes it manifests as a change in the physical condition. And I'm thinking now of disease, illness, limit and lack, a lack of peace. If those things we can affirm the positive, we can affirm our prosperity, we can affirm our health, we can affirm our unity with God in the face of these negative experiences. And when we affirm those things, then our mind and the process of our mind begins to change, and we see ourselves and that circumstance in a different way, and then we're guided to do what we need to do. And that's important. We talked about that last Sunday, that, this old business of let go and let God, which is a great statement, but there's a little bit more to it. And certainly in New Thought, we think there's more to it, because the presence and the power that indwells us and the reality of God is constant. And God's constant wish for you and me and everyone is good and only good. That's it. And so this business of the fact that God permits this or God allows this to happen in our lives, these things happen in our lives. God doesn't change at all. And so instead of just letting go of the situation and letting God take care of it, we need to let go of the situation. That is to give up believing what we see. We need to let go and let God guide us and direct us to the thing that we should do. And we have to do something. And in the very beginning, the first thing we have to do always is change our way of thinking. If we're sick, if we're depressed, if we have limit, if we have lack, if we have any kind of negative aspect of our life, that is a sign right immediately that we need to change our way of thinking. And if we change our way of thinking, we begin to affirm the indwelling presence. We'll be guided and directed in what to do. But we can't just fold our hands. And that's one of the things that we tend to do. We tend to fold our hands and submit to the will of God. At least we say that. But the will of God is already done. And so if we submit to the guidance and the direction of the will and the presence, then we will be guided and directed in ways that we should go. And maybe it means we never better get a better job, work harder, and in terms of building up our prosperity. Maybe it's that we have to change something in our life to regain our health. There are things that we have to do that have nothing whatsoever to do with the presence and the power of God, which is a constant reality indwelling us always. And the founders and foundresses of the wonderful movements that we represent in New Thought, Mary Baker Eddy and Ernest Holmes and Charles Myrtle Fillmore and the Kramer sisters, all of these people brought us this wonderful idea of the indwelling presence of God, which was not something that they brought uniquely, but it's something that they understood clearly that had been forgotten in many cases and in many traditions. And again, we're not talking about belittling anyone's faith or inviting people to change. We're just sharing our faith tradition and our thought with them. Yeah.
Well, of course. And what those wondrous people did was to make us more aware. And so it's a step, again, it's a step upward, because we are aware of the presence of God in our lives, and we are aware of our oneness with Creator God. And so as we are aware of that, then we see our best importance in the world, and everyone is important. And sometimes we might think, well, we don't matter, what we do doesn't matter, or that the world could go on without us. But we each have our own things we're supposed to do, and only God knows sometimes what those are. But we could find out in our own right if we just meditate and think deeply on it and ask questions and listen, because it's there for us all the time. We just negate our own importance so greatly that we don't really look deeply enough. But more and more, those wondrous ones brought in that truth, and then more and more is being manifest in the lives of everyone. And all religions are accepting that thought. Don't you think so?
That's very true, very true. And there is more understanding and more revelation in faith traditions about this indwelling presence and the access that we have to it. And it changes the concept that many of us grew up with, because so often we think of God as this external force. And so we're constantly trying to connect or do something to get ourselves together with the presence and the power of God, when in fact we know that the divine indwells us always, and that at different points in time we choose to deny that presence. We choose not to accept the guidance. We choose not to have our intelligence influenced and made manifest by the divine that's within us. But all of us have experiences where something far beyond us has changed our way of thinking and has allowed us to come to an idea or a thought of action that we would have never come to in and of ourselves.
Well, and that's such a wonderful thing. And part of it is part of the mass consciousness, the global brain, where mankind's consciousness has raised. And because it's higher and ever higher, then we can look to the future with great hope, and rightly so, instead of looking at the future with gloom and doom. And so it's a wonderful thing to know that we are each a part of God, and we each have this opportunity to manifest God in the world. And to me, that's what we're supposed to do, to manifest that God aspect of being into the world. We're each mirrors in a sense, aren't we?
We are, and that's a magnificent picture of who and what we are. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you an opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the ideas and concepts that we're sharing with you.
We would like to give you the opportunity to explore and discover in your own home the new thought teachings that this program is sharing with you by sending you a free copy of one of these booklets. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807. Whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can reach it through Confident Living.
Before the break, we were talking about consciousness, and I think for a lot of our viewers, that's a new idea, but consciousness is the dynamic of our thought process, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And our consciousness is partly personal and it's partly universal. So we can tune in to divine consciousness, and that's what meditation does for us and helps us to do. Or we can go with that aspect of being throughout the day if we choose to.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all of life is choices, isn't it?
It's all choice, yes, and it's always a choice in how we're going to think and how we're going to respond and how we're going to react to circumstances and situations. The issue of consciousness is really important for us, I think, to understand too, that we think so often that consciousness or that the dynamic of our mind has to do with our brain, and certainly it does in the physical sense, because we think of thought as coming out of our brain, because as human beings it is our brain that is the repository of our physical experiences in this life, our emotional experiences, and our perceptive experiences. But we understand too from a spiritual standpoint that consciousness even transcends the mind, because we know that when the brain transcends the brain, transcends the brain, because when the brain ceases to function, our consciousness continues.
Right.
And that's really what we talk about so often when we talk about the soul or the spiritual aspect of being. And of course, fairly universally, people believe, regardless of their faith tradition, in some aspect of spiritual being. And so the way that people can think of consciousness is that stream of awareness that proceeds out of the brain from a conscious standpoint, but it proceeds out of mind in reality. And as thought proceeds out of mind, which transcends the brain, it is consciousness. And it is that stream of consciousness that is the continuity of our awareness as persons or as beings. And in truth, we are spiritual beings in a physical experience. And as we say so often, we think we're physical beings that are having a spiritual experience, but we're actually spiritual beings who are always, at least in this pilgrimage that we have in this life, on a physical, in a physical experience.
Exactly. We could define that as the conscious mind, which we're all familiar with, and then the subconscious mind, with which we're all familiar, and then the supraconscious, with which we're all familiar. But too often we forget the definition between the three, and so then we think of consciousness as one, but when in reality, the supraconscious would connect us with the divine energy, and the consciousness of which you're speaking. And so, again, we don't know our own greatness. People don't give themselves credit, as a rule, for their own greatness and what lies within them. And when we think of God indwelling, we can just be grateful that God does indwell each person. And to know that is to really touch on greatness.
It is. Well, as Buckminster Fuller said, we're all geniuses, but because some of us are just less damaged than others. And that's very true, because some people allow that connectiveness with divine and infinite intelligence to come and flow through them. And we see that as genius and magnificent invention, and certainly it is. But they are individuals who have been able to take their individualized consciousness and connect with that which is divine, and the divine has come through and brought a wonderful understanding in some area or aspect of life to them and to those around them. And so many of us are, as in that term that Buckminster Fuller was making reference to, are damaged by the experiences of life. We're damaged because we believe that we're not worthy. We're damaged because we believe that we don't have the knowledge or the education. We're damaged because we think that some aspect of our life has brought us less than what we should have. And that damage has an impact upon our minds, on our consciousness, and upon our lives. And of course, what spirituality and religion are about is repairing these damaged souls, isn't it?
Yes, and that's what it should do for us, and does to a very great extent. But sometimes in the past, and still to this day, people don't mind being ruled by fear and guilt and so forth. But more and more, we're getting away from that aspect of being, and not thinking that God is fierce, but that God is love.
Right.
And when we can remember that truth, it goes a long way, doesn't it?
It does. And this aspect of fear, whether it's fear of God or fear of the circumstances or situations of life that we believe God has permitted, really paralyzes us, doesn't it? And
Yes.
keeps us from the good that is available to us at all times. But that fear, and of course in New Thought, we define it real simplistically, we've done this so many times before, as false evidence appearing real. That's fear. We fear those things that we think are going to come. We fear always those things that haven't come to pass, but we believe they're going to come to pass, and in many cases they don't. But they paralyze us, they keep us from our good, and they keep us from understanding our oneness with the presence and the power of God.
Yes, and we limit ourselves, and we put ourselves into a state of lack that's not really relevant, that's not really valid, because we put ourselves there in our minds, and then we're stuck. Where if we were optimistic and we just go ahead and know that God is good and that good is coming to us, then we're more apt to truly achieve that which we wish to achieve. And fearlessness of living is so important, because many people are so filled with fear for the future, fear for the people they love, fear in all aspects of being. If we can just really rise above fear in our lives, it makes all the difference in the world.
That has to do with this issue of detaching from the appearances that we see with our human eyes and hear with our human ears in this experience, and seeing beyond those experiences, and knowing that beyond those experiences there is guidance and there's a way out. And the way out always is up to us. And that goes back to the self-responsibility, which is so fundamental to New Thought and metaphysical philosophy, that we have an obligation. We have an obligation to ourselves, to those around us, and to God, with whom we share this experience and who brought us into this experience, that we have an obligation to be all that we are called to be. But in so many cases, we fail that call, don't we?
Yes, we do. And then guilt is another way in which we fail ourselves, because we're too apt to feel guilty. I was talking with a friend this morning whose mother died last night in another city close by, and she was saying, I just feel so guilty because I wasn't with my mother. Well, she was here in Long Beach with her husband, who's quite ill, in hospital, and she had taken him to the hospital yesterday. And so, of course, she would stay with her husband, and she was here. And her mother's been ill for a long time. And I said to her, that might have allowed your mother the freedom to go. And the mother is quite elderly, and it was, it seems time for her to go, and she really was eager to go. And so just the fact that her daughter wasn't there might have freed the mother up to go. So, and I talked with her about guilt a bit, because we should never allow ourselves to be pulled down because of our own guilt over something over which we have no control. Because we live our lives. If we live our lives the best we can and do the best we can, then there's no room for guilt, because we realize, and that's actually an affront against God, to feel guilty within ourselves when we've done the very best we can, isn't it?
It is. And this need for forgiveness starts with the need that we have to forgive ourselves.
Yes.
And so many times when we talk to people, as we often do, it's something that someone has said, something that someone has done. It goes back sometimes to childhood, because a parent did something or failed to do something, a relationship that ended, that people hold on to and are unwilling. They're either guilty or they're angry, or they have any one of a myriad of other negative emotions that they hold on to, that they're not willing to give up. through the spirit of forgiveness that we're talking about, and the ability to think differently about that circumstance or situation, and to move on from that point to the point where they are in life now. And we all have those problems of letting go of those things, especially those things in the past.
Totally, we need to. And I have a friend who used to say, "Ask me if I care," when someone would try to make her feel guilty or feel bad about something. And I think that's a good attitude for us to have, because if we're doing our best, and if we're really not trying to hurt anyone else, but we're just living the life the best we can, then we're doing the best we can. And I think that's a very good response. Ask me if I care, because I've done the best I can. That's someone else's problem. And very often we take on guilt and fear and other negativity in our lives when actually we're being self-centered in a sense as we do that, because if we're more outlooking and feeling infilled with God's energy, then we wouldn't do that to ourselves.
Right. We would instead claim the reality of that indwelling presence and acknowledge and affirm our oneness with it, and be guided and directed in that way only by circumstance and situation.
Yes.
And then we begin to think not with our mind, going back to that, the conscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious. When we put those together, when we put our mind together with the presence and the power of God and unite our mind with divine mind, then good things happen.
Yes, and when we think of God indwelling, then we need to really feel the presence of God within us. And if we consciously do that throughout the day, and in the evening during our retrospection, in the morning during our morning meditation, then we lift our own spirit. We lift our spirit. And as above, so below, as we lift our spirits, and we're lifting the spirit of all the people around us. And it's a wonderful domino effect.
And that effect has an effect on all aspects of our being. And we really unite with the presence and the power that indwells us all and sustains us all and gives us all the strength that we need for every aspect of our life. We've been sharing with you concepts and ideas about practicing the indwelling presence of God in your life. We hope that you found this information useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.